This is the second set of notes for this unit, and we are moving our way up the chain of taxonomy. We're probably going to be going more and more complex organisms as we go up this chain. Not exactly perfectly, but working our way up. So now, since we talked about the microscopic little unicellular organisms, the phytoplankton, the bacteria, the zooplankton, dinoflagellates and diatoms and all those things, now we're going to move into the marine producers, okay? Some of those are producers, of course, but these are the multicellular ones. Seaweeds and marine plants, everything from the basic seaweed you see on the beach to mangrove trees. That's what we're going to talk about now, all right? And I hope that you were able to answer some of those questions. Just some thought questions. And you're going to see if any of them are right after this notes, okay? So we're going to start with the seaweeds. Seaweed. So seaweed general structure. They're called macrophytes. Macro meaning, not micro. And they're eukaryotic, so they all have nuclei in their cells. They're multicellular, which we said before, but they're not like terrestrial plants. They still have these other, photosynthetic, eukaryotic, multicellular, but they don't have true leaves or stems or roots like terrestrial land plants do. And here's just some examples. We're going to go more deep into, deeper into all of these kinds. Okay. Now, the entire body of a seaweed, from body, structure, animals have bodies, plants don't have bodies, is called the thallus, the entire thing. So this is a kelp forest in California, and if you go from the very bottom to the very top, that's called the thallus. All portions of a seaweed can photosynthesize, which is really cool. Terrestrial plants, that's not true. Think of a tree. The bark doesn't have any photosynthetic material. The roots don't. The branches don't, just the leaves. But in seaweed, all of it does. It's virtually all of it, okay? They have these leaf-like portions. They don't have veins, so they're not quite leaves. They're called blades. And what they're meant to do is increase the surface area of the photosynthetic cells that have the chloroplasts in them to collect more solar radiation, and so that they can photosynthesize. They can make their own food because they're autotrophs, right? This is sea lettuce, and that's more kelp. Some of the seaweeds have nematocysts. Pneuma refers to air, okay? And cyst really refers to a bladder kind of thing, a round structure, okay? Also refers to like a cyst, like a cyst in your wrist or a cyst on your face, I don't know, whatever. A cyst, okay. And there's gas. Pneuma means that there's gas, some kind of gas involved. And that allows the seaweeds to float on the surface. They're like floaties, like when you were little and you would go to the pool or the beach and you wear the floaties on your arms. That's what these are. They're seaweed floaties. Some of them contain a gas excreted into them and filled carbon monoxide. I mean, that's pretty amazing. Some of them have a stem-like structure called a stipe. So here's smaller ones. And that's giant kelp that washed up on the shore in the Pacific Northwest. I don't know who that kid is. Just a random picture from the internet. Now in some seaweeds, they have the ones that don't just float around, the ones that hold on, they have these things called holdfasts. They're kind of like roots, but not quite. And they hold fast, meaning they hold on. And they come in all different shapes, depending upon the color or species of macrophyte we're talking about, okay? So, and they secure the thallus to the entire thing, right? This is the stipe. The whole thing is called the thallus, and this is the holdfast. And so they just grab on and they kind of hold on to rocks or other things. So these are called sea palms. They're really neat. This is when the tide went really out and exposed the sea palms to the air, which is a very rare event. We only get those on like spring tides. Remember when the sun and the moon are in a straight line? Straight, spring, straight. That's how you remember that. Neap tides are at an angle, right? So spring tide is going to make the tides much lower and much higher, exposing these very interesting Dr. Seuss looking cousin it being seaweeds, okay? And you can see they have these huge stipes, thick, such like really thick, like almost as thick as like my arm, and these really neat holdfasts that are kind of just grabbing on, kind of like roots. And then the blades, which would normally, do this in the water, but now they're just kind of weeping down. Anybody ever been to that place in California? I'd like to see that for real one day. It's pretty cool. So the difference, you have to fill out this area right here in your notes. The difference between terrestrial and marine algae is the algae are not supported by roots or a stem that's full of a lot of cellulose, okay? They're more supported by the water column itself. And typically they would just collapse on like those blades we saw on those sea palms when they didn't have any support. And then whereas the terrestrial plant retrieves its gases from the atmosphere and minerals from the soil, the entire algae, seaweed, absorbs those materials from the water itself, okay? Absorbs its carbon dioxide gas that's dissolved in the water, as well as minerals from the water, okay? And then only the leaves do photosynthesis. The whole thing does photosynthesis, remember that. Now, green algae is called chlorophyta, and only 10% of green algae is marine. There are 6,000 to 7,000 species of total green algae, but only 10% are marine ones. Some of them are called endophytes, meaning that they're plants that live in the tissues of other plants. They're almost like parasites, but not quite. And here is an invasive species. They can become invasive if they are brought to a region that they don't belong in, and they start growing and choking out things like corals. So that's what's happening here. And they're blocking and infecting the coral there. Not infecting, but affecting the coral. Sea lettuce again, Ulva lectuca. And this is a seaweed called dead man's fingers. Because I guess when it's laying there, I don't know, someone named it that at one time in its existence. Brown algae, so we have green algae, brown algae, and then we have one more color after that. Brown algae are called Phaeophyta. They have ranging from olive green to dark brown because of their yellow pigments. Remember the carotenoids. Species with pneumatocysts are called rockweeds or racks. We used to get brown algae on Long Island in the bay, and we would just call it pop grass because you could literally just pick it up and it's almost like the packing pop rolls of plastic pop stuff. I don't know, why can't I think of the name? Anyway, package material that you just pop and it's really fun and satisfying. Well, it's the same exact thing, but this is like a natural plant, algae, and you just pick it up and you can pop multiple times, pop, pop, pop. It's really fun. And then Sargassum weed is another example of a brown algae. This is Florida. You may have seen this. You may have seen, especially after a storm, where all of this piles of seaweed are collected along the beach. And this is what it looks like floating in the water. So you're swimming in the water, you might be swimming through some of that, and you're like, oh, there's too much seaweed, yuck. It's just seaweed. It's just like a plant floating in the water. It's not dirty or anything like that. Now, when it washes up, it could start to get, smelly, and there could be some little critters crawling around in there, and that's really the problem area. When it's in the water, it's just like touching a plant. It's nothing. It's not gross. But why does this happen? Particularly to us here in Florida. Why is this happening? Well, that's why. So I think you have a question in your notes about this. The Sargasso Sea is a region of the North Atlantic Ocean. So here's America. The United States of America is where we are, right there, okay? And so because of the Coriolis effect, the Earth spinning, I have to show you guys this as a reminder. So the Earth is spinning in this direction, right? Because the sun rises in the east. So if the sun's over here, you're going to see the sun look like it's rising in the east. Okay. So if I were to throw something from the North Pole to the equator, as the Earth is spinning, it looks like the object would be going in a curved path rather than a straight path over the surface of the Earth. So as the Earth is turning, the object looks like it's going to be curving. And so that is the effect, the Coriolis effect. That is the effect the spin of the Earth has on the surface currents of the world's oceans. And they go clockwise in the northern hemisphere and counterclockwise in the southern hemisphere. And it works on only large systems like hurricanes and stuff like that. So it's just a little refresher from one of the last units that we did. Okay, and so what that does, especially when a big storm comes, these currents will wash seaweed from this portion of the sea out of the Sargasso Sea and up on the shore. Okay, and so that's why you get that happening. Now, kelp is also a brown algae, and it's the most complex group. They thrive in temperate latitudes and Arctic waters, not tropical. So we're not going to have any of these down here, or in the Caribbean, or anywhere near the equator. Okay? And they're harvested for food in some parts of the world. And so here is a kelp harvester in Northern California, and they're only allowed to harvest the top portion of the thallus. They used to chop it at the base and take all of it, but that's pretty much like going to a mountain and cutting down every single tree and leaving the mountain bare. What does that do to the environment? Right, pretty stupid. So now they just harvest the top, and then they come back and it grows back again. It's pretty amazing. They can be 100 feet long, and they're literally like forests with creatures swimming through them and creatures crawling on the bottom of them, and it's just quite a neat environment. They can grow up to 50 centimeters per day. That is a half a meter. 50 centimeters. 50. That's this much in one day, if the conditions are right. That's pretty amazing. It's like bamboo is similar in a way. They have lots of these nematocysts filled with gas. And like I said, they make these kelp beds or kelp forests in the North and South Pacific. Here is the North Pacific, where sea otters thrive in this environment. Now, you have this table in your notes. So we're going to pause here just for a moment and start doing it right now while I'm talking, so that you can abbreviate this. Just abbreviate it. Read through it once and just get the main idea for why is kelp, what is the importance of kelp economically and ecologically, and what is the importance of Sargassum weed economically and ecologically, okay? So the main kind of point is kelp for economic. It's harvested for its algin, which is used for many things, including fireproofing fabrics. What? Fireproofing fabrics, that's pretty cool. Especially after our talk last Friday about that advertisement that I was in. That was a neat coincidence, I guess. And fertilizers, it's a healthy ingredient in food, so like literally eating seaweed. I'm sure some of you have eaten seaweed before. And a potential alternative energy source. That's the economic importance. For sargassum, the economic importance is that it serves as a nursery habitat for the fishing industry. Yeah, if it wasn't for the Sargassum Sea, and much of the fishing industry would plummet, and people would start to go hungry, i.e. starve, because we destroyed a valuable ecosystem, okay? And now ecologically, both of them have very similar ecological importances, but for the kelp, the kelp are known as what's called a foundational species. And because of them, they create the environment for all the other species to live in. It's a little bit different than a keystone species, but it's similar, okay? Among the most productive ecosystems in the world, but so is the Sargassum Sea, because all the, so many invertebrates, juvenile fish, young turtles, when turtles hatch from our beaches and they go out to the ocean, they actually head, many of them, if not all of them, head for the Sargasso Sea. And that's where they grow up from juveniles to a bigger size that can make its way back to other places on the shore and swim longer distances without getting, tired or eating. They can find more food readily, so they have more energy and they can swim farther. But the babies, they go right out there, and you can hide from birds, you can hide from fish, and that's what all these things do. And then all those animals poop in the water, and that gives nutrients back to the Sargassum weed. So it's pretty amazing, that whole food chain cycle of life kind of thing. So hopefully at this point you have, while I've been blabbering on here and wasting time, you have been able to jot down the main sentence or paraphrase or sentence fragment that you need to fill in those tables. If not, if you missed it, get it from a neighbor later, or come back to these notes at a later time. All right, so now we're moving on to the red algae in the phylum Rhodophyta. There are more species of red algae than the green and the brown. More species of this one. And they have a red pigment called phycobilins. And what happens is there is chlorophyll in their tissue. There is chlorophyll, but the red masks it. So you don't see it. You don't see the chlorophyll. They have to be in shallow water. They're no algae are deep water because there's no light, right? And there are approximately, that's what that symbol means, approximately. It's not a misplaced mustache. 4,000 species. Then we have Coraline algae, or Coraline algae, which are red algae that are kind of firm, I guess. They're not squishy like most seaweeds that you might experience, because they have calcium carbonate in their tissues to give them almost like a coral-like firmness, but not quite. I could take this and I could still go and crush it like I guess it would probably feel like crushing a thick piece of paper, maybe? I don't know. I was able to actually work with some of this at Sea Camp down in the Keys when we brought a group of students down a few years ago with a marine science class from Tampa. And these also serve as a fantastic habitat for lots of invertebrate creatures and fish. This one particularly is from England, so, but there are warm tropical weather ones as well, tropical climate ones as well. All right, we are moving on from the algae, and we're going to start talking about the plants, the angiosperms. Angiosperm kind of literally means flowering plant, okay? And these are, they have true leaves, true stems, and true roots, okay? They have specialized tissues like xylem and phloem. Xylem carries water up from the roots or anything that needs to go up, and phloem carries nutrients made in the leaves down to the other parts of the plant, which you may remember from biology. But only seagrasses are truly marine. The other ones we're going to talk about are just adapted to a saltier environment. Okay, they evolved to live in a niche environment where terrestrial plants could not, and the truly marine ones could not. So that middle area, that middle ground in the littoral zone. Here's some seagrass, Gold Johnson seagrass in Florida, and of course mangrove roots. We're going to talk about those today. So seagrass, they're not true grasses. They're only resemble. Their closest relatives are actually lilies. These are lilies. These are not seagrasses, but here's some seagrasses. Turtles love the seagrass. Manatees love the seagrass. They feed on them. One of them is actually called turtle grass, which we'll talk about. But seagrass beds are important habitats for shellfish, as well as breeding and feeding grounds for all kinds of creatures. And one of the biggest problems in Florida are boaters. Yes, you who own a boat, be careful and listen to my words. Because here's what happens. They drive over the flats with their boats, their motors, and they cut through the seagrass bed with the lower unit of their outboard motor or inboard motor or whatever. They're driving over the flats and they're damaging the seagrass beds. Now you may not think it's a big deal. For example, if I drove across your lawn with my Jeep, would that not leave a mark, a trail? Yeah, but that grass would repair itself and that track would be gone in a month, max. It would grow back and you'd mow it over and you wouldn't even see the track. Here, it leaves a scar. And if you look up, I should have put a picture here, I didn't think about it, but if you look up seagrass bed scarring, it's really sad. I'm going to say it, what ignorant boaters do. Okay, you have to be smarter than the average person out there because we're destroying our environment if we don't take care of it. We are the stewards of our environment, right? So different kinds of grass, eelgrass is one of them. Zostera, look, it's a capital Z and it's italicized. That must be the genus of that species, okay? Most widely spread, there are about 50 species, highly productive and provide shelter and food for a variety of animals. Shallow, well-protected waters of bays and estuaries. Here is a permit fish feeding on seagrass and common eelgrass. That's a jelly floating there. And then turtle grass. You have to draw this. Don't label it. Just draw it in your notes. This is roots. That's called a rhizome. And these are the sprouts coming out in the leaves. They have strap-like leaves, similar to eelgrass, but broader leaves. Muddy and sandy bottoms, up to 10 meters deep. That's about 30 feet deep, and then it gets too dark for them. And they play a very important role in stabilizing sediments of coral reefs because they have actual true, roots. So the roots are going to, just like the plants on the beach in the sand dunes, or a forest on the side of a mountain, if you remove the forest, you're going to increase the erosion, which is going to wash away all of the topsoil and everything else that lives there. Same with the beach. If you tread on the dunes, that's why it always says no trespassing, no, don't walk on the dunes, don't pick the sea oats. all those signs you see. There's reasons for that, because you're damaging the plants that are holding together the whole system there. And then waves and rain will wash away the dunes, and then the water will wash into the neighborhoods, okay? So they have roots, long story short, and the roots for stabilization. So quickly just sketch that really fast. Doesn't have to be perfect. You're just filling in that circle with this, pretty much the three parts: the blades, the strap-like leaves, the rhizome, and the little roots coming off of the rhizome, okay? And now we're moving on to salt marsh plants. In particular, this species is called spartina, and you can see that that is a species name because of the lowercase and italicized. These are true members of the grass family. But they tolerate salt, so they're not truly marine. You could not leave them covered in water, salt water. They would die if you did that. They have to be exposed above. They can be covered for a short time, like on a spring tide, when the tide comes up really high. But see, they have little flowers and seeds, little seed heads, just like other grasses. And so they have to be in that intertidal zone. They have to be exposed to the air. Now, believe it or not, these plants kind of mean a lot to me, because this is my book, well, my book, one of my books. This is a memoir that was published on Long Island, and it's called From the Edge of the Marsh. And so this is the bay house that I grew up in when I was a kid, and this is a rebuild of it, because Hurricane Sandy knocked down the old one and we had to rebuild it. But every summer, every weekend, duck hunting, goose hunting, fishing, sleeping out here. You know, it's kind of like glamping. You know, there's no electricity, no Wi-Fi, okay, no hot water unless you boil it yourself, okay. But we had places to sleep and a wood-burning stove, and just really cool. Anyway. All of this grass, all of this island that this is on, are this grass, the salt marsh grass, surrounding everywhere. So, and New York City is like 25 miles right there in the west. It's pretty wild that you can be in this wild place so close to such one of the biggest cities in the world. Very neat. So Spartina alterniflora, which is that species, it lives here, okay? This is where it's supposed to be. But somehow it got over here, possibly in some sort of shipment from shipping lanes or transported somehow on a boat. Maybe somebody moved and they brought their boat, and the boat had some of the grass or seed on it, and they drove it over here and it spread, and now it's invasive and taking over those parts of the coast in those states. And that was just 10 years ago. I don't know where it spread from there. It might have spread even further. Anything can become invasive if it's brought to someplace else where it's not native to. Other salt-tolerant plants are called halophytes. Anything that can, halophyte kind of means salt-loving, all right? So one of those is pickleweed. And yeah, there are recipes online for pickleweed salad and lots of other things. You can eat this stuff. It grows right out there with the salt marshes, on the salt marshes with those salt marsh grasses. There's a little mouse feeding on them. Even he thinks they're pretty good. So almost looks like asparagus, but it's kind of like a succulent, like a cactus, and they grow all over the place, and you can eat them. It's just kind of amazing, like a survival food, but more than that. And now we're going to move on to the last plant we're going to talk about, and that's mangroves. And some of you are maybe familiar with these because, I mean, you live in Florida, but all you got to do is go to the coast. All you got to do is go just a couple miles that way, and they grow all along the intercoastal waterway in between the beach and the mainland, right? And sometimes they get pretty wicked and wild. I mean, just imagine how the first people who came to Florida, and I'm talking about like the natives, like the Native Americans who first came to Florida and said, let's walk through there. Why would you ever imagine a forest that was just that? It's almost impossible to navigate through. How did they do it? How did they get to like the mainland from the ocean? And then moving forward, like when the Spaniards came here and the French and the Portuguese, and how did they all get through this tangled mess? There were no passageways. So it's pretty amazing. These plants are just incredible, the way that they survive in this salty environment. They can tolerate that salt. And usually the roots are covered by salt water. So species common to Florida. There are 3 species, and we're going to kind of have to know the order of them from saltiest to least salty. So the red mangrove is first. The red mangrove is the one that you see growing in the water. You see these seeds, these long bean-like things washing up on the beach all the time. I was just walking on the beach a couple weeks ago, and a lot of them had washed up with a lot of Sargassum weed. And there were a bunch of kids, and they were just collecting them all and like making like a little wall around their sandcastle with them. It was really cool. So then, because these are the ones that live nearest the water, they have the most salt tolerance. And this is where they live in Florida, okay? They live in virtually every county that touches the ocean, around from Tallahassee. Oh wait, no, Tallahassee's up here, so they do live in Tallahassee. Jacksonville, all the way down to Miami, the Keys, and all the way up again. So you can go in any, Palm Beach right there, you can go in any county, and you're gonna find these very prolific, salt-tolerant red mangroves with these bean-like seeds. Okay, you could just plant that in the ground in the right environment, and it will sprout a new tree. Now, moving up shore, okay, closer to dry land, away from the salt, you're going to get the black mangrove. And so they grow in between the red and the next one I'm going to talk about, which is the white. And they have these roots called pneumatophores. Pneuma means air, right? We learned that from the pneumatocysts that make the brown algae float. These are reaching up, just like cypress knees. I don't know if you're familiar with those. Those are the cypress trees, the inland, where the roots grow up out of the water to get air. Okay, now in cypress knees, it's not quite the same thing, but in this case they are, for oxygen exchange. And they have very coarse leaves, and they're able to expel salt through some glands, like, so I'm going to skip this for a second, like this. They have salt glands in the base of their leaves that enable them to tolerate salt more, okay? And then, so here's a question. Check this out. This is the black mangrove range. Do you see a major outlier here? Particularly where we live, right there in Palm Beach County, okay? Look, again, Jacksonville, all the way down the coast until you get to our coast. Now, I'm not going to tell you the answer to that question. You need to figure it out yourself. You can discuss it after these notes with the people at your table, that's fine. But why do you think there are no black mangroves? Or think about where they live. They don't live in the water, and they don't live up on the drier land. They kind of live in between. Now, I know the answer to that because I actually found this map last week. This map wasn't here originally, and I said, what? Because I didn't care about Palm Beach when I lived over here. It didn't matter. But now that I live here, and I'm teaching you guys who live here, I wanted to know why there are no black mangroves in Palm Beach County. So I looked it up. I went on hint, ready? Google Earth, and I zoomed in, and I saw a big difference between this part of the coast and these other parts. There was something different. So you figure out what that is, and you answer that question, okay? In your notes. And finally, we have the white mangrove. The white mangrove grows the highest up on the shore, higher than the red and black, because it's the least salt tolerant. So it found its niche. It found its little habitat that nothing else was thriving in, that it could thrive in. It wasn't quite totally not salt tolerant, but it was able to, a little bit to. So it adapted, not adapted, but evolved to grow here. And because of those salt glands. It has little small peg roots that stick up in case the tide comes up too high. And so here's kind of a generalization of where you'd find them all. You got the red mangroves, which are farthest out, the black mangroves, the white mangroves, and then you've got these other buttonwood. If you see buttonwoods, you're usually going to see the, some of the other ones. So, and you can see the mean high tide and the mean low tide where those would range. The white mangroves very rarely get covered by salt water, but once in a while. Black mangroves, usually every tide a little bit, and then the red mangroves are pretty much always in the water, unless you had some severe event where they all drained all the way down. Spring tide, once a month, maybe, okay? And you have to know the order of them. So you figure out red, black, white, how that's gonna work for you, okay? All right, and that's it.